I knew something had shifted the moment my daughter-in-law walked past me in the hallway without saying a word. Not a good morning. Not a note. Nothing. She moved through my house like I was a piece of furniture. She had long stopped noticing. I stood there in my housecoat, holding my mug of tea, watching her open the refrigerator, take out the orange juice I had bought the day before, pour herself a tall glass, and walk back to the bedroom without closing the fridge door. I closed it myself. That was a Tuesday in late October, and the maple outside my kitchen window had already gone bare. I remember because I had been meaning to rake the yard all week, and every morning I looked out at those fallen leaves and told myself, today I will get to it. But by Tuesday, I had stopped telling myself that. I had started to understand that the things I kept putting off were not going to get done. Not because I lacked the time, but because I had quietly stopped feeling like this was still my home. My name is Patricia. I am 67 years old. I live in a house I bought with my late husband Gerald in a quiet neighborhood just outside Hamilton, Ontario. We paid it off together over 23 years. Gerald passed 4 winters ago from a heart attack that came without warning on a Saturday afternoon. He was shoveling the front walk. I was inside making soup. After Gerald died, I rattled around in this house alone for almost 2 years. My son Daniel called every Sunday. He lived in Toronto with his wife Renee and their daughter Sophie, who was 9 at the time. The calls were short but steady, and I told myself that was enough, that I was managing. Then the pandemic years made everything harder, and when things opened back up, Daniel called one Sunday and said he and Renee were thinking about making a change. Renee had been working from home, and her commute into the city was becoming a problem again. They were looking at areas outside Toronto. Hamilton was affordable, he said, and it would be nice, he said, to be closer to me. I felt something warm move through my chest when he said that. I thought of Gerald and how he always wanted the house full of noise again. I thought of Sophie growing up down the road instead of an hour away. I said yes before Daniel had even finished asking. They moved into my house that April. The plan was that they would stay for 1 year while they saved for their own place. I gave them the 2 larger bedrooms upstairs. I took the small room I had used as a craft room and moved my sewing things to the basement. I did not mind. I told myself I did not mind. In the beginning it was good. Sophie would come downstairs in the mornings and sit with me while I made oatmeal. She had Gerald's eyes, wide set and dark, and she asked questions the way he used to, one after another, without waiting to see if the first one had been answered. I loved those mornings with her. They were the best part of the arrangement. Renee was polite in those early months. She said thank you when I cooked. She brought home flowers once from the grocery store and left them on the counter with a note that said, "For the house." I put them in a mason jar and kept them until the petals dropped. Daniel was working long hours at his firm, and I didn't see him much on weekdays. But on weekends he would come downstairs, and the 3 of us would watch something together in the evenings after Sophie went to bed. And it felt, in those moments, like something Gerald might have approved of. Then the year passed, and they did not leave. I didn't say anything at first. There was always a reason. Interest rates had gone up. The market was difficult. Renee's contract had changed. There was always something just around the corner that made staying the practical choice, and I understood. Truly I did. The housing market in southern Ontario had become something that frightened young families. I was not without compassion, but things had also changed in ways I had not anticipated. They began using my car without asking. Not often at first, just occasionally, when Renee's was in for service. Then it became regular. I would come downstairs on a Thursday morning to run errands, and the driveway would be empty. A text would arrive an hour later. Borrowed the Civic. Be back by 2. No question mark. They added streaming services to my internet account, and the bill climbed without anyone mentioning it to me. I noticed on my monthly statement from Bell 2 services I had never signed up for. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he said he would sort it out, and then did not. And after a while I stopped bringing it up because I did not want to seem petty. Groceries became something I paid for almost entirely. I did not track it at first. I told myself it evened out, that they helped in other ways. That family did not keep ledgers, but I was a retired bookkeeper, and the part of my brain that noticed numbers never fully switched off. By the second year, I had a rough sense of what I was spending on food for 4 people each month. And it was not a small number, and yet I kept quiet. Because Daniel was my son, and I loved him. And because every time I thought about saying something, I pictured Gerald's face, and I heard his voice telling me that family was worth more than money. But Gerald had never met Renee. I do not want to be unfair to her. She was not cruel in the obvious ways. She never raised her voice at me. She never said anything directly unkind. But there is a particular kind of disregard that does not require words, and Renee had mastered it. She would plan dinners without including me. I would come downstairs to find the 3 of them already seated, already eating, and there would be no place set for me. Not out of malice, she would say. She just assumed I had already eaten. But I had not eaten. And she had never once asked. She redecorated the living room without telling me. I came home from my walk one afternoon to find the armchair Gerald and I had bought at an antique shop in Stratford, sitting at the end of the hallway. Moved out of the room entirely. She had replaced it with a large sectional sofa that took up most of the space. When I asked about the armchair, she said she thought it was looking worn, and the new couch was much more practical for family movie nights. I carried Gerald's armchair back to my bedroom myself. It barely fit. I sat in it that evening and looked at the wall and thought about things I did not know how to say out loud. The card was the last thing. I had a credit card through my bank. A TD Visa I had carried for 11 years. I used it for groceries, for gas, for the occasional online purchase. I paid it in full every month. My credit score, the last time I checked, was excellent. Daniel had asked to be added as an authorized user 2 years earlier. He said it was for emergencies, in case something came up and his own cards were maxed or unavailable. I agreed without thinking much of it. He was my son. What was mine had always been, in some sense, partly his. What I did not understand at the time was that Renee would begin using it as well. Not for emergencies. For convenience. I noticed it gradually. A charge from a yoga studio on St. Evantee M. Clare Avenue I had never visited. A spa booking at a place in Ancaster for $212 on a Saturday. I had spent alone in the house. A delivery from an online clothing retailer, then another. Then a restaurant charge on a Thursday evening, when I had been home making soup for one, over the course of 8 months. By the time I finally sat down and went through every statement with a highlighter, the total came to just over $4,000. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after I finished that calculation. The house was quiet. Daniel was in the city for work. Renee was somewhere upstairs. Sophie was at school. I looked at the number I had written on the notepad in front of me. $4,218. I thought about what Gerald and I had done to earn that money. The years he spent at the plant, and I spent at the accounting firm. The lunches I packed instead of buying. The vacations we skipped so we could build what we built. The roof over this house, which I had paid to have replaced 6 years ago, and which had cost me nearly $14,000. I made myself a fresh cup of tea, and I sat back down, and I did not cry. I was done crying. That night at dinner, I made roast chicken. I set the table for 4. When we sat down, I waited until everyone had served themselves before I said anything. Then I said, quietly, that I would like to talk about the credit card. Renee looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at his plate. I told them, without raising my voice, that I had gone through my statements. I told them the number I had found. I told them I had not been consulted about any of those charges, and that I would like to understand when and how it had become acceptable to use my card without asking. Renee said she had assumed Daniel would sort it out with me. Daniel said he had been meaning to bring it up. I asked him when. Exactly. He had been meaning to bring it up. He did not answer. I looked at my son across the table I had sat at for 30 years. In the house I had lived in for 30 years. And I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. A decision. I excused myself before dessert. I told them I was tired. I went to my room and sat in Gerald's armchair, and I thought about the morning, about what I would do at the morning. When the house was dark and the upstairs rooms were quiet, I went to my desk and I wrote out what I needed to do. I did not sleep much, but I was not anxious. I was simply clear. In the way you become clear when you finally stop pretending something is fine. By 7 the next morning I was dressed. It was a Thursday in late November, and the sky over Hamilton was low and gray, the kind of flat light that arrives before the first real snow. I drove myself to my branch on Upper James. I sat in the parking lot until the doors opened at 9:30. My advisor's name was Karen. A woman around my age, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the steady, no-nonsense manner of someone who had been through a great deal herself. I told her I needed to make some changes to my account. I had Daniel removed as an authorized user on the Visa. I opened a new checking account in my name only and arranged for my pension deposits and my investment income to flow into the new account rather than the joint one. I asked Karen about changing my PIN and updating my online banking access. She did all of it without making me feel foolish. Near the end, she looked at me over her glasses and said, "Good for you." I nodded. I did not trust my voice at that moment. I also called my lawyer that afternoon. Her name is Gail, and she has handled my affairs since Gerald passed. I told her I wanted to review my will. I told her there were some changes I needed to make. She said she could see me the following week. When I arrived home that evening, the house felt different. Not smaller, not colder, just different. Like I was seeing it properly again for the first time in a long while. Daniel called my cell at 6:30. He had tried the Visa at a gas station, and it had been declined. He said it in the tone of someone reporting a bank error, something external and inconvenient that I would naturally want to help resolve. I told him it had not been an error. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mum, what is going on? I told him, calmly, that I had removed him from my account. That I had made other changes as well. That I would be happy to sit down and talk when he was ready to have an honest conversation, but that I would not be continuing as things had been. He hung up. I put the kettle on. 2 days passed. Renee did not speak to me directly. She moved through the house with a kind of pointed silence, the way people do when they want you to feel the weight of their displeasure. I felt it. I did not react to it. I had spent too long reacting. On the 3rd day, Sophie came downstairs while I was having breakfast. She sat down across from me in the chair she always chose, the one nearest the window, and she looked at me with those wide, dark eyes, and she said, "Grandma, is everything okay? Mom and Dad seem upset." I looked at my granddaughter. She was 11 now, nearly 12, and there was something in her face that reminded me of Gerald so precisely that for a moment I had to look away. I told her that grown-ups sometimes needed to work things out, that everything was going to be all right. I asked her if she wanted oatmeal. She said yes. She said she liked when I made it with the brown sugar and the walnuts. I made it that way, and we ate together at the table without saying much else. And it was the best morning I had had in months. That evening, Daniel knocked on the door of my room. He sat on the edge of my bed, not in Gerald's armchair, and he looked at the floor for a long time before he spoke. Then he said he had been going through the statements himself. He said he had not known, or had not let himself know, the full amount. He said he was sorry. I let him finish. Then I told him what I had been too careful to say for 2 years, that I had loved having them here, that I had meant every invitation, that I had wanted it to work, but that somewhere in the arrangement I had disappeared, and I had allowed it to happen, and I was not able to allow it to continue. I told him I was not asking them to leave immediately. I understood the practicalities, but I needed a real plan, a date and a commitment, and I needed things to change in this house in the meantime. He nodded. He looked like Gerald in that moment, around the eyes, in the way he held his jaw when he was trying not to show that something had landed. He said, "I hear you." "Mum," I said, "I know you do." The plan we agreed on was a move-out date of the following April. 6 months. Daniel began looking at rentals in the West End of Hamilton, in a price range that was manageable for them without my help. Renee and I did not have a conversation like the one Daniel and I had, and I did not force one. Some things do not require resolution, only distance. The money was never repaid in a lump sum. We did not approach it that way. Daniel arranged for a small amount to come to me each month. Quietly, without drama, I accepted it without making it the measure of whether things were right between us. Gail helped me revise my will in December. I made changes that reflected what I actually wanted, not what I had assumed others expected. I felt, when I signed those papers, something that I recognized from long ago, a kind of steadiness, the feeling of being the author of your own life. By February, the maple outside my kitchen window had been bare for months. I had bought a bird feeder at the hardware store and hung it from the lowest branch. And in the mornings, cardinals came, and sometimes chickadees. And I would sit with my tea and watch them and think about very little. Sophie still came downstairs for breakfast before school on the mornings she could plake. She told me once, in the offhand way, Children reveal important things. That she thought it was really nice how I always made time for her. That not all grandmas were like that. I told her that being her grandmother was one of the best things I had ever done. She said she knew I thought about Gerald a great deal in those winter months. I thought about the years we spent building the life that this house represented. I thought about how easy it is to let the weight of love become a reason to say nothing, to absorb rather than address, to mistake endurance for generosity. Gerald had always told me I was too patient. He said it with admiration. But in his eyes I sometimes thought I saw a warning. I understood it now. Dignity is not something you fight for in a single dramatic moment. I had come to believe that it is something you tend. The way you tend a garden or a house, consistently, without waiting for a crisis. You tend it when things are small and manageable, before they become $4,000 on a credit card statement and a son looking at the floor. But even when you arrive late, even when you have waited longer than you should have, it is not too late. That is what I want anyone to understand who is sitting somewhere right now, in a house that no longer quite feels like theirs, holding a cup of tea that has gone cold, waiting to feel ready. You do not need to wait until you are ready. You only need to get dressed in the morning and drive to the bank and tell them what you need. The maple got its leaves back in May. Just before Daniel and Renee moved out, Sophie hugged me for a long time at the front door. She had my phone number written on a folded piece of paper in her jacket pocket, as though she was afraid of losing it. Even though it was already saved in her phone, I watched their car turn out of the driveway and head down the street. Then I went inside. I moved Gerald's armchair back to its place by the living room window. It fit exactly as it always had. It had never stopped fitting. I had simply stopped insisting on that. I put the kettle on. I opened the kitchen window just a little. Outside, a cardinal landed on the feeder, bright as anything against the new spring green, and I sat down and watched it for as long as it chose to stay.